This is the Unrationed Podcast. My name is Evan Chasteen.
Josh Randa.
I'm Tony Albrecht.
And we're coming at you with episode I'm Not Sure. I should probably look that up before we record. But the way we start every episode is with wild moments. So, Tony, what is your wild moment from the week?
We went down to Toronto over the weekend and took the kids to the aquarium there. And in a way, it feels weird to talk about an aquarium as a wild moment, since an aquarium is by definition not wild. Seville, I asked a question while we were in there. They've got one of those tunnels where you walk through and then everything's above you, and they've got all these sharks, these like 15-foot sharks and huge stingrays, and the green sawfish, which was a fish that I had never heard of, but it's like this 20-foot long thing that has like this 5-foot saw mouth. It is a wild experience to like see all these animals swimming around. But my question to Seville was, why don't any of the animals ever eat one another in that space? She found that question to be stupid. To her, it was obvious that they just choose animals that don't want to eat the other animals in there. I was like, wouldn't those sharks eat everything?
Yeah.
But I guess that speaks to both my sense of the wildness of the thing and also to the relative domesticated nature of that environment. But it is, it's cool to see. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that prompts some fun thoughts. Josh?
I don't feel like that's a dumb question. I can see that being, there's a legitimate answer to that beyond just they choose fish that don't eat each other. All right, my wild moment. So we got a dog a couple weeks ago, another dog, a puppy. And I took both of my dogs for a run this weekend, or a couple runs this weekend. And the puppy's just like nuts. And so I kind of felt like a pack of wolves, just like running. I mean, she's like so scatterbrained, like she chases after every single rabbit. Riley wants to chase after every single rabbit, but she knows better. And so, yeah, it was like different tiers of wildness, like domesticated, kind of domesticated, but like instincts are to chase every animal. And then one that's just like, I want to eat every rabbit. So, yeah, that was fun. Tess, our new puppy, we didn't name, we inherited the name. Yeah, she's an interesting pup. She's really cute, but she's a lot of work. So yeah, that's my wild moment. I'm sure there's going to be many more wild moments. And also there's going to be some background noise because I have my two kids watching Lion Guard. So if I go off camera or I don't respond to something, it's because I'm getting them a snack or helping manage the kiddos this morning.
Yeah, every moment's kind of a wild moment in those scenarios with two kids running around watching Lion Guard.
Yeah.
I ran my first half this weekend. Not a race or anything, just on my own in the woods with my watch telling me how far I've run. And it was pretty awesome.
Love it.
If you would have told me last year I was going to run a half marathon this year, I would have probably thought you were crazy. And I think I'm about to run one a week for the next 4 or 5 weeks, at least a half. I'll be up above that, getting closer to Colorado. And that feels nuts to me. It really feels nuts that is a reality that was possible.
Awesome.
Just from, I mean, I think often about why that's possible this year, right? Because if I were to invite somebody to do something similar, it's like, well, how? Like the how question is always intriguing to me. It's like, how do you run an ultra marathon, or how do you run a marathon, or how do you run a business? How do you have a successful family? Like how do you do those things? And currently, I'm sure I'll have more and more reflections the further we get away from this deal into the future. But it seems as though the invitation and to do something big, and the belief in others, the belief that others had in me to actually do that thing, are the two most impactful pieces of that. So invitation and belief. I was invited to do something big, and then somebody actually believed that I could do it other than myself.
Good question for you.
Yes.
If you think, if we didn't meet weekly or check in, do you think where does that, like, where does the community aspect and the fact that we're all kind of checking in on a daily, weekly basis, how do you think that plays into it?
I think it's pretty great, particularly when we did Wild 32, which I know we're about to start up again in a few days. And I'm excited about that. These weekly check-ins are nice. Ultimately, what's keeping me running and spending time in the woods for miles at a time right now is probably a little bit of fear of failure and looking like a dumbass in the woods, where the stakes are somewhat high. Like, you got to keep moving, man. So I think that plays a bigger role at the moment.
Yeah, that's good.
But also there's a part of that where I think I might quit if we weren't meeting weekly, and if I wasn't sharing my progress with you, both of you, and getting feedback like, yeah, we think you can still do it. Because there's a part of me that's fearful, like, we'll get out there and at some point I'm just not going to be able to keep moving forward. And that's, I think, why I'm on the trail for what I consider a lot of miles. And it won't, I'm increasing gradually there, but yeah, there's an aspect of fear and not looking like a dumbass, and then getting the encouragement weekly that I'm on track, or at least you're not like, hey, we need to change this thing. You're not saying that yet. Maybe that's the case that we will change it leading up to it, but
no.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
That is what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty motivating.
Yeah.
So
I it's pretty awesome. Yeah, I find it like when you were sharing that, yeah, I get like little tingles on my arms, like just like inspiring. Like that you've never run a marathon. That's Jack. He wants to watch another Lion Guard.
nice.
And he's gonna get to watch another episode of Lion Guard. But yeah, just like the fact that that's never happened before, and now you're gonna do that same thing that you've never done before over and over and over again, and then do that same thing you've never done before, just did 3 times in a day.
Right.
Or 2.5 times. Like that's really, really inspiring. It's pretty cool.
So today we're talking about men's rites of passage, which is a part of what unrationed, maybe is the most unrationed part of Wilds in the Woods, is a men's rite of passage. So I think the best place to start here would be to define, maybe collectively or individually, share what we think a rite of passage is, and then move into maybe why we think it's important, and then maybe even move into why we think it's important that we do this. So those maybe 3 phases. What is it? Why are they important just in general? And then why do we feel that it's important that we do this as a part of Wilds in the Woods?
I feel like you may have the best answer as to what a rite of passage is. Evan.
Okay, well, I'll take a first stab at it then. I'm curious to see if I have the best answer, because it is something I continually think about, and I don't know that I have a 100% confidence in my answer. So I'll share what I think it is right now. And I do hope that it actually evolves as we do this, and my definition of it changes over time. So from what I've read and what I've experienced, it seems as though there's three really critical pieces of rites of passage. And I've talked about thresholds several times. I probably will continue talking about thresholds because I'm really enjoying thinking about them and using them as a map to kind of navigate how life goes. But there are three phases: orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And I think a men's rite of passage guides men to a place of disorientation where it's an individual's choice to maybe continue on that road of disorientation or that path of disorientation and navigate it, and what it takes to navigate a disorienting experience are the things that we are hoping to, or that any rite of passage hopes to bring to the surface within the man, because it seems as though positive morals and ethics are what get people through disorientation healthy on the other side of a disorientation. So we've talked about being men of integrity, men who tell the truth, men who act rightly, take right action. And it seems as though times of disorientation maybe get us to the place where we learn the importance of those things. And then there's this reorientation or reintegration on the other side of it that seems very important, where it's you take those things that you learned in the time of disorientation and apply them to everyday life, everyday relationships on the other side. So I would say a men's rite of passage consists of three phases. There's an orientation, there's a disorientation, there's a reorientation. And those three are important because it brings to the surface from within the things that we are saying great men embody. Is that too complex of a definition?
Well, I guess the short answer is I'm not sure it was a definition of what a rite of passage is. I think you
Fair.
described the mechanics of how we're thinking about the process of undergoing it.
Okay, let me take a stab at a definition then. It's a time of separation where man undergoes something strenuous to some extent, whether that's emotional, mental, physical, and then returns home.
An experience where a man undergoes something strenuous and then returns home. Yeah, I mean that sounds pretty good. When I think about, oh, and now I've got a couple kids coming in here.
Yeah, bring them all in, man.
we get oh,
what's up?
Hello everybody.
Hi.
You want to say hi to Josh and Evan?
Hi there.
Are you picking your sister
Noah,
up?
do you want to come say hi?
She's too heavy. Yeah.
Noah got jealous. He wants to say hi too.
What's up, Noah?
This is just
you guys,
a kid.
You leaving now?
Can you say hi to Mr. Evan and Mr. Tony?
Will you close the door, buddy? No, I'll close the door. Don't you worry about it. There are no adults in sight. I wonder what my kids are doing. So when I think about rites of passage, all those things you're saying are spot on and really essential. And I'm thinking about it very simply as an experience that happens in the context of a community a tribe, a family, whereby a person goes from one stage to a new stage of life. And in the course of our lives, we can have, you know, a number of rites of passage, right? And some of them can be more explicitly stated than others. But it's this is ritualized way of signaling, you know, in the way that like a bar mitzvah would be a rite of passage, right? Or you know, in the Catholic context, I think we're raised, you know, Josh and I are being raised Catholic. You know, things like First Communion, or, you know, like they're the sacraments that when you do those sort of rites of passage. Yeah, that's, and then, but you had framed it specifically for men, and that's a trickier proposition for me in terms of like what we think of those as being. But Josh, do you have other thoughts on what a rite of passage is?
Well, when I was thinking about it, I wasn't necessarily processing just rites of passage in general. I was thinking about unration specifically, or just male rites of passage. And I get stuck on the like men coming together to intentionally beat the savage out of us. Like, and so that's, you know,
define the savage. Like, we've used this term kind of, there's a difference between a savage man and a wild man.
Yeah, I'm going to use a real life example the other day that I was not happy with. I was annoyed with Tess, our new dog. You know, she like peed on the carpet and, you know, pooped on the carpet. And I got frustrated with her and kind of like put my hand on her neck and like kind of pinned her down. I was like, no. And after I'm like, right, that's using brute force, because I don't know how to control my anger, and I don't know how to appropriately. You know, I'm talking to my friends. Can you get down for a second? And like, I should have more control over that, right? That's savagery, as opposed to a wild man that, you know, knows how to, like you said, like act rightly in that situation. I can control my frustration, my anger a little bit more. And so there's an element of these rites of passage that help us purge the things that are not right, that are not ordered, that are not warm yet demanding. And so I think there's these moments in time that to Tony's point, it needs to be a clear delineation between I was at this stage and now I'm moving beyond to something else. But
well, and we're doing all this in the context of what we're understanding as a culture that lacks proper rites of passage, like proper initiatory rituals or experiences, right? So Josh, the only reason you're like that is because you haven't had enough proper rites of passage.
That's right. It's not my fault.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to get on my lap. He's throwing. Yeah. This could just be an audio one.
Well, I mean, actually, it's more disruptive to the audio than it is the video in itself.
Good point. Yeah.
Evan, so you had talked about three things. You had what is it, and then what were the other two questions?
Why is it important? Yeah, so why a rite of passage is important, which I think we touched on. It. I did have a question before that. There's a lot to unpack in everything that we just said, and it's worth noting that I think in the next couple of months, we probably should be aligned on a clear answer to these things, like have it written down, and not saying that our answer is the answer, but it is what we orient ourselves to, what we believe this is, how we define it, and that guides our decision making in putting these rites of passage together. Because what I struggle with or wrestle with conceptually is the idea that for unrationed specifically, I do think it's possible that a man shows up and undergoes a rite of passage and doesn't leave changed. So there's a certain amount of responsibility on the man who is showing up. And I don't know where to place that in what we're talking about, because that's not the case with rites of passage historically, like for a bar mitzvah or for a first communion or a confirmation of sorts, or, it's like it was done to the boy and the boy became a man through that. I'm unfamiliar with stories where a rite of passage was performed ritually and the boy remained a boy on the other side of it. But I think that that has to be the case, right? Like rites of passage are leading an individual to a place where transformation happens within through this ritual element, through this experience of disorientation and reorientation. But there has to be times when that doesn't work. So I'm having trouble just conceptually saying what unrationed is, because to promise somebody something, like to say you're going to leave a man, is a big promise, like, and should be taken seriously. So how do I get that to a place where I have a better understanding of how this works?
Well, our starting point with this project wasn't a particular thing. It was the lack of a thing, right? Yeah. What brought the three of us together around this idea was this acute sense of loss or lack from having come of age in a society that has lost all ability to coherently guide its young people into adulthood. So when I bring up the sacraments from my childhood, those are in some ways, I think they are intended to be rites of passage, but they're not. Because for most of those kids, you're just going through the motions, right? You're led through it, but there's not really any thought, and you're not actually different on the other side of it. In a way, and I think that's specifically the problem, is that, for me, those are the things that come to mind as the closest things I have to rites of passage experience for the most part. And they are woefully insufficient for what that role has historically been for human beings, where we don't do it. So like, why is that important? It seems, well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint how we would be different had we come of age in a society that had a sense of how to do this, right? Like there's all it's a counterfactual that we can't actually know, right? So but for me, so there is this question of, as you were articulating, Evan, what is it we're hoping to provide for ourselves and then also for other men in the wilds and the woods and through unrationed experiences? And I'm optimistic that this is going to work, in the sense that if we do this right, nobody who joins us is going to be going through the motions, right? Everybody's going to come with a level of intentionality and seriousness um, that then, when faced with this intensive experience of like being immersed in a liminal space, crossing the threshold into where change can happen, I really like our chances. Another reason I think it matters is simply because as parents and as fathers raising children, both daughters and sons, I really want something better for my children in this respect. I want my children to have some sense of growing up in a way that we need to essentially design what these rites of passage or initiatory rites can look like in a society that just doesn't have them. It's just totally ill-equipped to you know, to help our children make sense of an increasingly chaotic world, it seems.
Yeah. So as you were talking about all that, I was thinking about Moana for one reason or another. I think the film does a good job of showing like a coming of age rite of passage. And it seems as though Moana's father keeps her from what he perceives as dangerous. And actually, like in the montage where she grows up on the island, there are rituals being performed. Like she gets the headdress, which would be a ritual. She's learning the native dances, which would be a ritual. And so she's going through the rituals that I would say are rites of passage in that culture. And maybe that's incorrect, but seemingly with my current knowledge, I would consider those rites of passages. So then those were all in preparation for the real rite of passage, it seems, which was leaving the island and experiencing a true disorientation. So I agree with everything you said. And then I'm also like, I don't know that it's the institution's job, whether it be the church or us, for like, it seems as though what we're doing is more prepping men for the actual rite of passage, like doing a test run for one that comes in life. Like life will throw us into disorientation at one time or another. And the three of us have actually only experienced the rite of passage in that way thus far. The one that's actually changed us. So we have stories of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation, very specific ones that I think we've shared on this podcast, that we look to and say, oh my gosh, I am a different person after that happened. And what we're trying to do, this is more a question than a statement, is create an environment where we learn how to navigate those times of disorientation in life after we've come home from an unrationed event. And then once we engage with that in life after an unrationed event, I mean, I guess that's the test of whether we're changed or not.
Just one more point based on what you're saying there that's coming clear is the distinction between ritual and rite of passage.
Okay.
Where it seems like maybe when I think about a lot of the closest things that could be considered rites of passage in my own life, it's a confusion. It's confusing the rite of passage, which is that process of being oriented, getting disoriented, exploring that, then returning. I'm confusing that with ritual, which is simply a ceremonial moment in time. So like our unrationed retreats are going to have an element of ritual, but that element of ritual is a small subset of the overarching experience, right? That the rite of passage is that whole trajectory, that whole loop of going out, coming back.
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens. And I think you're spot on that and frankly, maybe this highlights why the lack of rites of passage is such a problem as we grow up, and maybe leads to states of prolonged adolescence or arrested development. A show I just revisited and had a great time with. But that when we don't challenge ourselves in that way, or when we aren't challenged, like put in those situations, there's a risk of staying small, or that the world stays small, or that we learn that we should stay safe, that we should stay comfortable.
And then we should fight for that.
Yeah, exactly. When in reality,
Yes.
what we need to be fighting for is to be more adaptable and stronger and more resilient in a way that we'll be able to navigate whatever comes.
Yeah, that's spot on. I really like that. Why is it important
Josh,
that we do unration? Yeah, Josh, do you have any thoughts on that? And then why is it important that we're doing this? Like, why the three of us?
I tackle the last question. Part of it too is that, one second, I'll let Tony tackle that last question.
I think I did with I do think that for me now, it's as a father, of really wanting to figure this out to help my children, because in my own life, I do think that lack of guidance led me to some dark places, largely self-inflicted, where I did not learn humility growing up. Like I did have a sense of entitlement that was really unhealthy and unproductive. And I needed to get my ass kicked in various ways, literally, figuratively, spiritually, before I started to understand that I had been doing it all wrong. And it wasn't by design, it was because it had to happen, right? Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, if it was by design, it was by my own design.
Well, in life, I think life is designed in such a way that won't allow us. Like life is a big rite of passage.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
the way I was careening, there were going to be consequences, right? It's karma.
Right.
Yeah. I eventually started reaping what I was sowing in a way that became very disorienting.
Right.
And then realized I was on a different trajectory, a much better one. And then that was 12 years ago, coming to terms with my alcoholism and the consequences of that. Where then over the last decade, really, I do see my life as largely just a series of those periods of orientation, disorientation, reorientation you're describing, right? Where that's been my primary learning mechanism and mechanism for growth. That's why I think it matters. Josh, you're really pondering.
I am pondering. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right there with you in terms of my primary motivation being, I have two sons and setting the path, a trajectory for them. I think the thing that we're all missing, that I feel like I really admire, like my grandfathers and my dad, like there's been a lot of like stories of just like people who did things right. And so I can like draw on those stories. And so there's an element that we miss in our society where we think every dude needs to be perfect who's a hero. And we don't realize that like we're gonna make bad decisions as human beings. We're going to make decisions, even if we go through a rite of passage that we're not proud of, we're not happy about. It doesn't make us feel like we're living up to our potential, but it's this rite of passage specifically, we're talking about here, that I think gives us our own story. It gives us the story of those around us to help persevering, to help learn, to help keep us learning, to putting one foot in front of the other. And those are the stories that I want to tell my kids about Tony and Evan on the trail when they saw adversity. Little things like that, that it's going to inspire me to be better, but it's going to give me something that is a different orientation outside of dad, for my sons to be able to talk about, so as much as I want to feel and go through the suffering, whatever it is, the breaking down of one's ego, I want to watch somebody else go through the same thing, because it'll contextualize what I'm going through. I'll be able to see that manifested in somebody else and see the battles that they're going through. So I think just that overall symbolism in the event is what I hope to somehow bottle up and communicate effectively, to have teaching moments for my sons until they are ready for that moment for themselves.
Thanks for listening to the Unrationed podcast. If you'd like to find out more about an unrationed event and journey with us on a men's rite of passage, wildsinthewoods.com.